The plains stretched endless beneath a sky the color of burnished steel. A late summer wind rolled across the tall grass, whispering with the sound of 1,000 unseen voices. Clara sat inside the jolting wagon, one hand gripping the sideboard, while the other clutched a damp kerchief against her face to keep the dust at bay. The caravan had been on the move since dawn, their oxen trudging slow but steady, the creak of wheels and the rhythmic thud of hooves the only constant companions. Her father rode ahead, rifle slung across his back. He had spoken little that morning, but his eyes scanned the horizon with the nervous watchfulness of a man who knew the prairie was never empty. Clara had grown up hearing tales of raids, wagons burned, families scattered, but she had never witnessed such horrors herself. She prayed she never would. The land was deceptively quiet. Hawks circled lazily overhead. Prairie dogs darted between burrows. The only sounds were the groan of wood and leather, the murmurs of her mother's hymns from inside the wagon, and the restless whinnying of the horses. Then the wind shifted. Clara felt it before she heard it, a heaviness in her chest, a tightening. That made her glance instinctively toward the grasslands on their right. The stalks bent unnaturally, as if something large and swift passed beneath them. A moment later, the shrill cry of a bird cut through the silence. It wasn't a bird at all. Riders! Her father's voice rang out, harsh and desperate. He yanked his rifle free, spurring his horse toward the wagon. The grass erupted. They came like shadows breaking free from the earth. A dozen Cheyenne warriors, painted for war, their ponies thundering across the ground with terrifying speed. Sunlight flashed on spear tips and rifle barrels. Feathers whipped in the wind. Their cries shrill, guttural, fierce tore the air like the scream of hawks diving from the heavens. Clara's mother shrieked. Her younger brother Samuel, only 10 years old, ducked down inside the wagon bed, clutching her skirts. Clara could only stare, frozen, as the horsemen closed in. Her father fired. The crack split the air, and one rider wheeled sharply aside. But for every man driven back, 2 more surged forward. The warriors were swift, weaving in and out of rifle fire with practiced ease. Clara saw her father's face twist, not with fear, but with grim certainty. He had known this was coming. The wagon jerked violently as the oxen panicked. The driver, shouting and pulling at the reins, tried to steer them forward, but the warriors had already encircled them. Dust rose in choking clouds. Arrows thudded into the sideboards, quivering inches from Clara's head. Out! Run! Her father bellowed. He leapt from his saddle, firing again, then swinging the rifle like a club as a rider came too close. Clara tried to move, but Samuel clung to her arm, his small hands like iron shackles. She pulled him with her, stumbling from the wagon, but the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift like water. A rider swept past, a blur of painted skin and flying horsehair. Clara felt her arm torn free from Samuel's grasp. She screamed his name, but her voice was swallowed by the chaos. The boy disappeared into the haze of dust and hooves. Hands seized her. Rough, unyielding, they dragged her off balance. She kicked, clawed, gasped for breath, but it was like fighting the storm itself. A cloth course, smelling of leather and smoke, was pulled tight across her mouth and nose. She tried to cry out, but the sound was strangled, muffled into silence. The last thing she saw before the world narrowed was her father standing in the dust, blood staining his shirt, rifle raised high even as 3 riders closed around him. His eyes found hers, briefly, fiercely, and then the cloth pressed tighter, stealing the air from her lungs. The plain swallowed everything else. When Clara opened her eyes, the sky above was no longer the pale, endless blue of the plains, but the storm of shadows and motion. She lay slung across the back of a horse, her ribs pressed painfully against the animal's heaving side. the world jolting and lurching with every stride. Her wrists were bound in front of her with rawhide strips that cut into the skin, and the cloth still covered her mouth and nose, sour with sweat and smoke. Each breath came shallow and ragged. The more she struggled against it, the more the air seemed to vanish, as though the cloth itself were alive, intent on choking her. Her lungs burned. Her chest heaved desperately, but only scraps of air reached her. Panic clawed through her, sharp and merciless. I can't breathe. Her thoughts once, a blur of terror and grief, narrowed to a single truth. She was suffocating. The horse beneath her seemed to thunder forever, its hooves striking the earth in a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. Every jolt drove her closer to the edge of unconsciousness. Somewhere behind her, she heard voices, shouts, commands, laughter, but they came muffled, distorted, like echoes from a world already slipping away. She tried to twist her head, to free her mouth from the suffocating cloth, but her strength failed her. Her body sagged against the horse, too heavy, too weak. A memory flared suddenly, her mother's hymns in the wagon, soft and steady, her brother's small hands clutching her arm. Clara tried to cling to that sound, to anchor herself, but the cloth pressed tighter, and blackness crept in at the edges of her vision. I can't breathe, she whispered, the words rasping uselessly into the fabric. It was then that the horse slowed, the rhythm of hooves breaking into a jarring stop. Hands seized her again, dragging her roughly to the ground. Clara collapsed to her knees, the earth spinning beneath her. She felt the tug of rawhide cutting deeper into her wrists as someone jerked her upright. The voices were clearer now, harsh, guttural syllables, rising and falling with the cadence of men speaking quickly, decisively. She could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Command, argument, urgency. The cloth shifted. One of the warriors stepped in front of her. Younger than the others, his face was streaked with paint, but his eyes were not as hard, not as cold. They met hers for a brief second, and she saw surprise flicker their surprise at her pallor, her gasping chest, the fear etched across her face. With a sudden movement, he tugged the cloth away. Clara coughed violently, drawing in air so sharp it seared her throat. The world spun, and she nearly fell again, but she forced herself upright, gulping the wind as though it were the sweetest water she had ever tasted. Tears streamed down her face, unbidden, uncontrollable. The young warrior's gaze lingered. For the barest moment, his expression wavered, not cruelty, not triumph, but something closer to unease, even pity. His lips pressed together as though he regretted what he had seen. Then his face hardened again, and he stepped back. Around them, the other warriors continued to argue. Their voices rose and fell, some glancing at Clara, others gesturing toward the horizon, toward the place where the ambush had left blood on the dust. She did not know their words, but she felt their meaning. What to do with her? She shivered. The air had never felt so precious, yet dread coiled in her stomach with each breath she drew. She was alive for now, but the look in their eyes told. Her fate was not yet decided. And standing apart, the young man who had pulled the cloth away said nothing. He only stared at her, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, as though some battle far greater than hers was raging within him. The sun was sinking when the warriors finally slowed their pace. They had ridden hard for miles, weaving through ravines and patches of tall grass until Clara no longer knew which direction the wagon train had been left behind. Now, as twilight bled across the horizon, the party dismounted in a narrow hollow, shielded by cottonwoods and scrub. Clara's legs buckled when they pulled her down from the horse. The rawhide still bound her wrists, swollen and red from hours of rubbing. Dust caked her skin, sweat stung her eyes, and her throat was raw from the gag. She swayed on her knees, the earth tilting beneath her, but she forced herself not to collapse. They spoke in quick bursts around her, their voices sharp, urgent, carrying the weight of decision. Clara understood nothing of their language, yet she felt its gravity. She was an object of debate, her life balanced between their words. And then she looked up. The young warrior stood apart from the others, his gaze fixed on her, the paint on. His face was smudged, streaked from sweat, but his eyes, dark, searching, did not waver. It was he who had pulled away the suffocating cloth. He who had given her air when she thought her lungs would burst. Their eyes met. For the briefest instant, the world narrowed. The shouts of the others dimmed. The pain in her wrists dulled. Even the pounding of her heart seemed to fade. All that remained was the intensity of his stare. There was something in it that unsettled her, not hatred, not triumph, but something raw, uncertain. Clara's breath caught. She remembered her whispered plea, the words muffled into the cloth. "I can't breathe?" Had he heard her? Had those words pierced through the barrier of language and struck him as they had struck her? The warrior shifted, his jaw tightening as though he wrestled with a thought he dared not speak. His hand twitched by his side, then stilled. His gaze lingered, heavy with meaning she could not name, before he looked away sharply, joining the circle of men. But Clara had seen it. She had seen the moment his mask slipped, the crack in his hardened composure. In his eyes she had glimpsed not only a captor, but a man, one who, for reasons beyond her grasp, had hesitated. The others did not share his hesitation. One, older and broad-shouldered, pointed at her with the flat of his hand and barked something. That made several nod in agreement. Another spat into the dust, his voice rising with contempt. Their gestures were harsh, decisive. End her, use her, trade her, she could not tell which, but none sounded merciful. Her stomach twisted. She had no weapon, no voice in this debate, nothing but the memory of that fleeting glance with the young warrior. Could such a moment matter? Could it mean anything against the weight of their tradition and anger? The circle broke. The older man strode toward her, eyes hard, step sure. Clara shrank back, her bound hands trembling in her lap. The knife at his belt caught the last rays of the dying sun, glinting like a shard of fire. Then, quietly but firmly, the young warrior spoke. The Abe. Others stilled, heads turned. The older man paused, his brow furrowing. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. Measured, deliberate, defiant. The young man gestured toward her, not roughly, not dismissively, but with a kind of restraint. He said more, his voice low, steady, as though trying to shape the air itself into calm. The older warrior barked back, but the young man did not flinch. His shoulders squared, his eyes locked on the elder's, and the tension between them rippled through the hollow. Clara's chest ached with the effort of holding her breath. She realized with a chill that her fate now rested in this unspoken struggle. The circle of warriors had shifted. Their debate was no longer abstract. It was embodied in two men, the one with the knife and the one who had given her air. The knife did not leave its sheath. Not yet. The young man's words seemed to carry weight, for the elder finally spat into the dust with disgust and turned away. The circle broke apart, voices resuming but less heated. Clara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The young warrior glanced back at her just once. The look was fleeting, but it struck her with undeniable force. He had chosen, and with that choice, everything changed. Night settled slowly over the hollow. A fire crackled at its center, the flames licking upward, sparks drifting into the dark. Around it the warriors sat in a loose circle, their painted faces shifting in and out of shadow. Some spoke in low tones, others sharpened blades or checked their bows. Horses grazed nearby, their restless snorts punctuating the silence. Clara sat apart, her wrists still bound, though looser now, as if tied without the same care given to a prisoner destined for death. She felt the rawhide bite when she moved her hands, but she did not struggle. Struggling would only draw attention. Instead, she sat as still as she could, watching. The fire's glow painted the warriors in shifting hues of red and gold. They were younger than she had expected, men barely older than her father's farmhands, their bodies lean, eyes alert. They spoke to one another with ease, but when their glances landed on her, the tones grew sharper, heavier. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood what she was to them. The outsider, the problem. And yet, not all eyes looked at her the same way. He was there. Across the fire, the young warrior who had pulled the cloth from her face. His name she did not know. His voice she had only heard once, spoken firmly against the elder. But his eyes, those she remembered with clarity, for they had held something the others did not. Now, in the shifting firelight, his gaze returned to her. It was not constant. He would look away when another spoke or when one of the older men barked an order, but always, after a time, his eyes came back. She felt the weight of them steady, searching, almost questioning. Clara dared not hold his gaze long. Each time their eyes met, heat rose in her chest, not of shame, but of fear, mixed with something harder to name. She did not trust him. How could she? Yet in a camp where every glance cut like a knife, his alone seemed to acknowledge her as more than a thing. The silence between them grew into its own kind of language. When she shifted her bound wrists, grimacing at the sting of the rawhide, his eyes followed the motion, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. When she pressed a hand against her ribs, sore from the ride, his jaw tightened. And when she lifted her gaze toward the horizon, searching the dark as though it might bring her brother or father back, his shoulders lowered as if he, too, carried some invisible burden. It was nothing. It was everything. The fire dimmed as the night deepened. Some of the warriors stretched out beneath blankets of hide, their bodies sinking into the earth with the heavy ease of men long accustomed to sleeping under stars. Others remained awake, their voices a soft murmur against the hum of crickets. Clara, sleepless, wrapped her arms around herself and tried to summon the warmth of memory. Her mother's hymns, her father's stern voice, Samuel's small, eager laugh. But each memory hurt, a knife twisted deeper with every heartbeat. And then she felt it again, that gaze. She looked up. Across the fire, the young warrior sat apart, his face lit in amber and shadow. His eyes found hers, and this time he did not look away. He held her gaze, steady, unflinching, as though testing her, asking a question without words. She could not answer. She had no voice here, no power, no choice. Yet something in her silence became an answer of its own. The fire popped, throwing a spray of sparks skyward. For a heartbeat, his expression softened, not a smile, not comfort, but a loosening of the hard mask he had worn since the ambush. Then it was gone, shuttered behind discipline, his eyes cast downward. But Clara had seen it, and though fear still gripped her, though her body trembled with exhaustion and dread, a fragile thought stirred within her. Perhaps her whispered plea, "I can't breathe," had reached him. Perhaps he had heard more than words muffled into cloth. Perhaps he had understood. It was not hope, not yet. But it was something close enough to keep her awake long into the night, her eyes fixed on the young warrior across the fire, waiting for the silence to speak again. By morning, the hollow was alive with tension. Smoke from the fire drifted low across the camp, stinging Clara's eyes. The warriors stirred restlessly, their voices sharper, movements quicker, as though the night had not eased them but sharpened their edges. Clara sat close enough to hear, though not to understand. Their language was a tangle of sounds, but tone told her more than words ever could. The men were divided. Some glanced at her with hard stares, their hands resting casually on weapons, as if to remind the others how easily this debate might be ended. Others kept their distance, watching with eyes less certain, caught between disdain and unease, and at the center of it stood two men. The older warrior, broad-shouldered and scarred, barked his words with the authority of someone used to command. He gestured toward Clara, then toward the trail they had ridden, and spat. His voice rose and fell like a drumbeat. She was dangerous. She would slow them. She would invite pursuit. Clara didn't need to understand to know the meaning. Opposite him stood the younger warrior, her rescuer, though the words still felt fragile. He did not shout, but when he spoke, the camp stilled. His words were measured, deliberate, his voice even. His hand moved as he spoke, once gesturing to Clara, then to the sky, then to the land around them. The argument swelled. Voices overlapped. The circle widened. Some nodded toward the elder, their faces grim, their agreement sharp. Others tilted their heads toward the younger, not with open support, but with the hesitation of men pulled in two directions. Clara's stomach nodded. She could feel her life tilting in that balance, like a scale set to tip with the slightest shift. The older man's voice cut through the air again, harsher now, his gestures sharp enough to slice. His hand fell to the knife at his belt, and he drew it with a slow, deliberate motion. The blade caught the morning light, flashing once before settling, heavy and undeniable, in his palm. Clara's breath caught. She stiffened, pressing back. Against the tree trunk behind her, the rawhide biting into her wrists as if mocking her helplessness. Her heart hammered, loud enough she was sure they could all hear it. The younger warrior stepped forward. It was not a charge, not aggression, but it carried the weight of defiance. He planted himself between Clara and the elder, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. He spoke again, louder now, his words sharp and clear, his hand slicing through the air in refusal. A hush fell. The two men faced each other, the firelight catching the lines of their painted faces. The elder's knife glinted, his chest rising and falling in quick, angry breaths. The younger's hands were empty, but his eyes blazed with a conviction Clara had not seen before, not last night, not even during the ambush. The silence stretched. Taut as a bowstring. Then another voice broke in, a man from the circle, older than the young warrior but not as scarred as the elder. He spoke firmly, his tone carrying the weight of compromise. He gestured toward Clara, then toward the trail, then spread his hands wide. His meaning, though cloaked in words she could not grasp, was plain enough. Not death, not freedom, but something in between. A trade, a ransom, a bargaining chip. The elder spat, disgust written in every line of his face. But he slid the knife back into its sheath. His voice still lashed like a whip, but the danger had passed for now. Clara let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her body trembled, relief mixing with dread. She was not to die this morning. Yet the truth was no comfort. Her life was no longer her own, but a tool, a weight to be bartered with. The young warrior said nothing more. He only glanced at her once, fleeting, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to his people, his posture rigid, as though the argument had cost him more than words. Clara lowered her head, her bound hands trembling in her lap. She had survived another choice not her own. But she knew the balance was still fragile, and one misstep could shatter it. The camp moved as the day wore on, the warriors guiding their ponies in long, weaving paths across the prairie. Clara rode in silence, perched awkwardly on the back of a small, wiry horse, her wrists still bound before her. The sun burned overhead, relentless, the heat searing her skin and baking the dust that clung to her hair and face. She swayed with each jolt of the horse's stride, her body aching from exhaustion. The rawhide cut deeper into her wrists with every movement. the skin there blistered and raw. She longed for water, for shade, for even a moment of stillness. But none came. When at last the warriors halted at a stream to water the horses, Clara nearly wept with relief. She slid from the saddle with difficulty, her knees buckling beneath her. She crouched in the dirt, her bound hands pulling painfully against the knots, and watched the warriors drink freely from the cool water. Her throat burned with thirst. The sight of it, the splash of clear liquid against their hands, a steam rising faintly as it hit sun-warmed stones, was torment. She tried to look away, but her body betrayed her. Her lips parted, her tongue pressed to the roof of her mouth, her breath quickened, and he saw the young warrior. He had kept his distance. Since the argument that morning, his face unreadable, his silence unbroken. But now his eyes flicked toward her, sharp and knowing. She dropped her gaze at once, ashamed of her desperation, but not quickly enough. He moved with purpose, filling a small leather pouch at the stream. Clara's pulse quickened. He walked past her once, as though to return to the others. Then, glancing quickly over his shoulder, he stopped. The camp was noisy, men tending horses, others talking over the fire. No one was watching closely. He knelt beside her. Clara froze. She lifted her eyes, meeting his. His gaze was steady, intent, though his movements were quick, efficient. Without a word, he raised the pouch to her lips. The first sip was agony and salvation at once. Cool water spilled into her mouth, too much, too fast. She coughed, choking on her greed, but he steadied the pouch and let her drink again, this time in smaller swallows. The relief was overwhelming. Her body shook with it, tears springing to her eyes unbidden. When the pouch was empty, he pulled it back, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, those eyes softened for the briefest instant. Then he did something more dangerous. He reached for her wrists. Clara stiffened, unsure. His fingers brushed hers rough skin against her raw wounds as he probed the knots in the rawhide. She glanced wildly around the camp. No one seemed to notice yet, but her heart hammered with terror. If they were seen. The rawhide loosened, just lightly, enough to ease the cutting pressure, to let blood flow more freely into her hands. Not freedom, not yet, but mercy. He pulled back, swift and discreet, the mask of indifference slipping over him once more. He rose, pouch dangling loosely from his hand, and walked away without a backward glance. Stunned, her wrists still bound, her body still aching, but the burning fire of pain had eased. Her lips were wet with water, her throat soothed, and in her chest something new flickered. Not hope. Hope was too fragile, too dangerous, but something that felt dangerously close. She turned her head slightly, watching him rejoin the others. He did not look at her again, not once. Yet she felt the weight of his choice. In defying the elder, in loosening her bonds and sharing water, he had risked more than she understood. For reasons she could not fathom, he had chosen to see her not as a burden, not as an enemy, but as a human being. The prairie wind stirred, carrying with it the smell of smoke and grass. Clara closed her eyes, clutching the small thread of mercy as if it were a rope strong enough to keep her alive. By the time the sun dipped low and the warriors made camp again, Clara felt the weight of exhaustion settle deep into her bones. Every step, every breath, was a reminder of how far she was from safety. Yet as she sat by the fire that night, her wrists no longer burning as fiercely and her thirst eased, she knew she owed her fragile endurance to him, but mercy never came without a cost. The first sign of it arrived quietly. The elder warrior, the one with the scars and the knife, watched. His gaze swept the camp like a hawk's, and when it landed on the young man, it lingered. Clara noticed the way his eyes narrowed, the way his hand hovered at his belt as though the knife there was always a thought away. She lowered her gaze, heart tightening. He had seen. The others too seemed more aware that evening. Where they had once ignored her, now their glances carried weight-quick, suspicious flickers toward her, then toward him. A murmur moved through the circle, a current of unease. She could not understand the words, but she did not need to. The tone was enough. When food was passed around, the young warrior received his portion last. A man near the fire broad-backed, his expression sharp with contempt, muttered something that drew low laughter from two others. The young man said nothing. He only took his share, squatted by the edge of the firelight, and ate in silence. Clara's chest tightened. She saw the line of his jaw, rigid, unyielding, and the tension in his shoulders as though he braced for a blow that did not come. He had not looked at her once since giving her water, but the camp had already marked the act. Mercy was not invisible. Later, when the fire had burned low, the elder rose. He spoke to the others in a voice that carried through the night. His words rose and fell like strikes of a hammer-hard final. Several nodded. A few laughed again. Harsh and cruel. And though Clara could not understand, she knew. The words were about her, about him, about the danger of blurring the line between enemy and kin. The young warrior answered. His tone was calm, steady, but it carried an edge that cut through the fire's crackle. He did not raise his voice, yet every man in the circle turned to listen. His words were slower than the elders, chosen with care, as if he measured each, one on a scale before letting it fall. The elder spat into the dust and strode away, muttering. But Clara saw it. The look he cast back, sharp and venomous, aimed not at her, but at the young warrior. That look was a promise. Clara's heart raced. She wanted to cry out, to warn him, to thank him, to do something. But what voice did she have here? She was bound, foreign, powerless. If she so much as raised her head, she would only confirm their suspicion. So she sat in silence, her stomach clenched, watching him bear the weight of what he had done. And yet, even as the camp settled, as the men stretched out to sleep, and fire dwindled to embers, she felt something shift inside her. Guilt pressed heavy on her chest, not only for what her presence had cost her family, but for the danger she had brought to him. He had risked himself for her against his people, and though she had gained only water and a little relief, he had gained enemies within his own circle. When the wind stirred, rustling the grass beyond the camp, she lifted her eyes. Across the dying fire, the young warrior sat awake, his silhouette rigid against the night. His face was unreadable, but the flicker of flame caught the glint of his eyes. Sharp and restless. She did not know his name. She did not know why he had chosen mercy. But she knew one truth. He had set himself apart, and in doing so he had tied their fates together more tightly than any rope could bind. And in that silence, heavy with consequence, Clara understood something she had not dared admit before. If he fell, she would fall too. The night stretched long, broken only by the low hiss of the dying fire and the restless snorts of horses in the grass. Clara did not sleep. Her body was too stiff, her wrists too sore, her mind too full of images she could not escape. Samuel's small hands slipping from hers, her father's blood on the dust, her mother's cry swallowed by chaos. Every time her eyes closed, she saw them again. So she stayed awake, knees drawn to her chest, staring into the dark. The young warrior remained awake too. He sat at the edge of the firelight, his back straight, his head lifted as though listening to something far beyond the camp. More than once Clara found her gaze drifting toward him, and more than once she looked away, afraid to be caught. But the knowledge that he had not abandoned her, had not turned cold despite the risk, was the only thread holding her together. At last, pale light crept across the horizon, softening the hard edges of the prairie. The dawn was quiet, almost tender, a fragile reprieve after the storm of yesterday. Clara drew in a long breath, the first that felt steady, full. It shivered through her chest like something unfamiliar, almost sacred. Alive. She was alive, yet dawn also brought movement. The camp stirred, men rising, stamping out the last coals of the fire. The elder barked orders, his voice cutting through. The morning calm like the crack of a whip. Horses were saddled. Packs were tied. The rhythm of travel resumed, and Clara knew her life was not her own, but a burden they carried, a question not yet answered. As she was pulled to her feet, her loosened bonds shifting against her wrists, she dared a glance toward the young warrior. His face was unreadable, already set into the mask he wore among his people. But his eyes flicked once to hers, quick and certain, before sliding away. It was enough. That single glance told her what words never could. She had not imagined his mercy, nor the weight of his choice. He had not rescinded it. For reasons still hidden, still locked inside him, he had chosen to see her. But Clara also saw the danger clearer in the daylight. The elder's eyes lingered on her, then on him, sharp as a blade. The other warriors, too, watched with quiet suspicion. She felt it like a noose tightening not only around her neck, but around his. Her survival was now tied to him, and his honor was tied to her. The thought chilled her, even as it steadied her. When they mounted to ride, Clara's horse stumbled. At the bank of the stream, its hooves sinking into the mud, she swayed, nearly falling. A sharp cry burst from her lips before she could swallow it. Instantly, heads turned. The elder's mouth curled in disgust, his hand lifting as if to strike the horse forward or strike her. But the young warrior was there, swift, sure. His hand gripped the reins, steadying the animal, steadying her. His words were quiet, directed at the horse, but his glance, fleeting, fierce, was meant for her. A silent command. Breathe. Do not falter. The elder scowled, muttered something dark, but did not interfere. Not yet. As the caravan moved on, Clara sat straighter in the saddle, her breath measured, steady. She felt the rawhide shift against her wrists, no longer cutting as cruelly. The prairie stretched wide before them, golden in the morning light, endless and indifferent. She had no illusions. Danger shadowed her every step, but for the first time since the ambush, she no longer felt wholly alone. She drew in another deep breath, the air sharp and sweet, and held it like a secret, because now dawn had given her more than survival. It had given her the faintest thread of trust, fragile, perilous, but real, and she knew, with a clarity that made her blood run cold, that this thread bound not only her fate, but his.